Hi, in the previous two videos, we talk about compensation. In the first video, we had a discussion on compensation and its objectives, and then we dealt with the components of compensation. Now, that was the second video. So, in the components of compensation, I have we have came across that the first component talks about the basic payment part of your remuneration for the work what you do, and this constitutes three things: wages, salaries, and allowances. uh, Wages and salaries are kind of the base upon which your work remuneration uh, depends, or you can say like it's the reflection of your payment, reflection of your work in terms of payment. Now, salary is the other part, but in today's video, we will look into the wages aspects. Specifically, we'll look into what wages are, what is the meaning of wages, and the concepts associated with the wages. Now, actually, wages is a kind of an age-old concept that emerged with regard to the payment of money in exchange for the work being done by a person. So a person, whenever a person does some work, for that person gets the money. Now, work is exchanged with the money here, and we consider that in terms of wage. And there is other part also. Sometimes we get it in the form of salary. The difference is also there. So wages, when we talk about in such aspects, we can think of wages in various forms. It can be negotiated or contracted wage rate per day or week or month, or it can be a gross earnings for the day's work, which might also include your overtime, your incentive payments, and your allowances. We also refer wages to or take home pay, which would include, now we all know that the gross earnings minus all the deductions what we get in our pay slips. So these deductions might include our social security deductions like LIC or any other kind of investments what we make, and tax deductions and other professional tax aspects, or any other kind of deductions what you might have, like donations or anything which comes under your payment, your payslip. Now, but these are the general things what we refer to the word wage. So uh, in that sense, or in a very simple in a very simple aspect, money paid to the workers for uh, the work which is done is his or her wages. Now, the other things, benefits like pension, welfare funds, social security, etc., and all this, they are something which are in addition to the wages what you get. For an organization, these additional things called what we think of as benefits, and the base payment what you get for the work, that is the wage, these two form the total labor cost for an organization. Uh, from that aspect, we may again come into a contradictory situation, like we use the other term salary also. Uh, that's normally what happens in our usual way of conversations. Uh, we use the word wages interchangeably with salary word, but in one sense we can differentiate wages with the term salary. What we get uh, for our work, for our work uh, on an yearly basis or on a monthly basis, we can consider that as salary, whereas what we get on a day basis or on an hour basis, we can consider that as wages. Um, and there is another aspect, like we can attach like to blue collar workers and white collar workers. Normally we all know that white collar workers we attach it to the office going people, and blue collar workers we attach it to the factory workers, more skill based, more what is say physical capability based kind of workers. So we can think of attaching these two terms in terms of the kind of or the category of workers here. So for white collar office going workers, we can think of, we can connect the word salary, whereas for blue collar workers who are going to the factory, this wages work is generally attached. So in that say there's a difference out there, so that is also, that difference is also considered. But however, we can define or according to a one definition, wages can be defined as the payment to the workers for placing their skill and energy at the disposal of the employer. So for the employer, what and all the skills and energy being put in terms of the work, for that work, whatever payment is done, that we can generally consider it as the wage. Now this the method of use of that skill and energy is being at the employer's discretion, means the kind of work that needs to be produced. Now that is in requirement of the employer, and the amount that is being paid should be in accordance to the work, and that can again be based in terms of the contract of service between the person who is producing the work and the employer. So wages in that sense, or we can clearly define it as the payment to the workers for placing their skill and energy at the disposal of the employer, and the method of use of that skill and energy is being at the employer's discretion, and amount to the payment being in accordance with the terms stipulated in a contract of service. Now this usage of wages, or the wages actually being uh, put across in various contexts, in various forms, in various legislations, on different concepts. So we can see that there are various terms being used uh, for the wages part. We can see that there is statutory minimum wages. We can see that there are basic minimum wages. We can see minimum wages, fair wage, living wage, need-based minimum wage, money wages, real wages. Like that, there are a number of concepts which have come up with what exactly the wage is about. Now, some of these terms, actually, these terms have emerged from the legislations, labor legislations, in fact, and some in terms of where and all court decisions are being made, or where and all some, what do you say, some labor kind of payments are being done. So, in those areas, we'll see that these different terms for the wages have come. So each one have their own notation, right? And they are being expressed considering the various situations that apply on time to time and from country to country. So in that sense, these terms do not have, or we cannot put these terms with regard to the wages or these concepts in a very definite way, right? So we cannot have a definite what do you say, definition of these terms, and put those definitions at a universal disposal. So there is this in that case there are various such concepts with regard to wages, but from our syllabus point of view, we will be looking into the three types of wages, that is minimum wage, fair wage, and living wage. Now, considering the first aspect, the minimum wage, this minimum wage is a concept which first emerged in Australia and New Zealand, and that was came out in order to what do you say bring about settlement in industrial disputes which were being happening in Australia and New Zealand. And later on, it spread across the globe, and in the Indian context, we actually have a separate law enacted for this minimum wages concept. So we have Minimum Wages Act 1948 that actually takes care of or provides legal provisions in terms of minimum wages. Now, wherever these act applies, it is mandatory for those companies to make minimum wages for the works what they extract from their employees. Now, actually, there is no definition for minimum wages in the Minimum Wages Act 1948, but the committee upon which this law was enacted, the Fair Wage Committee was formed, established. Actually, Fair Wage Committee was constituted by government in 1948 itself, and that committee came out with a report. In that report, they have given the definition of what minimum wages should be. So they gave a definition what the minimum wages should represent. But there is exactly no such kind of definition in the act. So according to the report, which defines minimum wages as the wage which must provide not only for the bare subsistence of life, but for the preservation of the efficiency of the workers too. For this purpose, the minimum wage must provide for some measure of education, medical requirements, and amenities. So it is something which can be basically required for a person to live as well as to no, maintain the balance between what is being work done and what is the payment. So there should be an equity of payment according to the work, and also some kind of basic requirements that can be fulfilled through such payments. So you do a work, so you pay in such a manner that you are paying according to the work, as well as that payment should also make sure that the person who is receiving the payment could able to sustain his or her life, as well as the third category, that that person could able to fulfill some basic requirements for the life. So simply it is not something which we can say like this is the work and this is the equivalent payment. So that work and that equivalent payment should go beyond that equivalency with the work. So then only we can have that work can be continuously result into some kind of productivity. So there is some efficiency out there. So you can preserve the efficiency and result into some kind of productivity. Otherwise, if basic requirements are not fulfilled, most probably people may not think of working, right? And it might result into sweating of the industry, right? So as I have told that there is no exact definition of what minimum wages in the act, So in that sense, even the exact content of the minimum wage cannot be fixed, or it is not fixed there. It's not static. So you cannot consider that minimum. Why it is not defined? Because it is there is no fixed aspect. There is no static content which you can define with regard to the minimum wages. It is actually very dynamic nature in terms of time, in terms of place factors. So time to time things do change, and from one place to another place things will change. So how do you consider what is the right level of minimum wage for a particular place at that particular time? Or you can, and you apply it to all other times and all other places. So in that sense, having a uniform minimum monetary remuneration for a total country is not feasible, and it is not desirable also. So that's what being expressed by that's what expressed by National Commission on Labor. So they have expressed this inability to come out with a fixed minimum wage. So if there would have been a fixed minimum wage, then there would have been a definite you can say definition for the term minimum wages, right? But since there is no such kind of definiteness can be provided, so what the act, minimum wages act 1948, what it does is that it provides norms and procedures using which wages can be fixed. So government has to governments, different governments, that might be central government or even the state governments, they can use these norms and procedures so that they can fix minimum wages and appropriately, right? With regard to different employments, and they are scheduled in the act. So for different employments, different minimum wages might be fixed. And how to is that is the case of norms and the procedures given in the act. And government has to revive and revise them regularly, specifically not more than 5 years. So every 5 years, these minimum wages have to be revised, and they have to come out with a new minimum wage rate. And this changes from one sector to another sector, right? One employment area to another employment area, and what employment areas and all that, they are expressed in the schedule, right? So there is no fixed term, there's no minimum wages being fixed. They are fixed according to the law, and they can change on time to time. And for the same, sometimes even what happens that for the same kind of work in one state, one minimum wage might be fixed by that government, state government. In another state, depending on the conditions, depending on the various situations, uh, that state government may come out with a different minimum wage, right? So it varies greatly from time to time and from place to place. But how it should be, the base can be identified, or some a backup can be drawn in order to understand how these minimum wages are to be fixed, is based on the objectives that is being considered for minimum wages. Now, the basic objective should be to avoid exploration of the workers. So you don't need to. No, you should not make sure, you should not allow a situation wherein employers exploit their workers. So there should be some secured level of wage that can be paid in equity to the workload. Then consider the rise in wages in the industries where their wages are very low. Before it generally happens, or it was there at 19 at that time. It was seen that Some employers were exploiting their workers. Some industries were paying very low for their workers, so they might have be having very low payments, and that might lead to uh, sweating in the industry. So to prevent that, so you need to fix a minimum wage wherein such exploitation or low wages can be avoided, and people can be sufficiently secured in their life, and they can sustain their lives. And the other objective is to promote peace in the industry, so that there is a guaranteed wage rate, that will enable the minimum fulfillment of the minimum requirements from the both sides. And at the same time, the objective is to raise the standard of living. And if standard of living increases, even people will find working will be a little bit happy thing, and they can think of working in a more efficient and with a higher productivity levels. Now, this all this actually started with, as I've told, setting up of a committee. Based on that, Minimum Wages Act 1948 was established. But that committee actually was came up in order to uh, look into the wages aspect, and it was actually named as Fair Wages Committee, right? And this committee uh, purpose was to identify the principles on which fair wages should be based. So again, fixation might not be the case here. It is about coming out with some specific principles, so using which wages can be fixed, and come out with some base suggestions uh, on which these principles can be applied, right? So in that sense, Fair Wage Committee again came out with their aspect, like, so along with minimum wages, even there should be wages which can be uh, more sufficient to the workers, or you can say like higher level of payments will help the workers in order to achieve more higher productivity. So they come out with this aspect, like fair wage need to be had, which is somewhere above the minimum wage, but below another concept called living wage. So fair wage is something which is above the minimum wage and below the living wage. So the lowest wage what you should provide is the minimum wage. So minimum wage can be fixed as being expressed, or as you can see, as you have seen in the previous slides. Minimum wage can be fixed based on the norms and principles or procedures laid down by Minimum Wages Act 1948. But if you're paying more than that, then you have fair wage concept being applied, and that upper limit, that higher payment above the minimum wage, is the fair wage. Means you are giving it fairly, better than what the minimum being prescribed, and that can go higher up to an upper limit. That depends on the capacity of the industry to pay. So in that sense, if we look into what this fair wage is a wage rate uh, which is fair in a narrow sense when it is equal to the rate content for similar workmen in the same trade and neighborhood. And in the wider sense, we can look into the payment rates which are predominant throughout the country, and in generality of trades, in all other trades. So a particular payment being done considering the same work, what is the payment being done? Something like for a mason, what is the fair wage minimum, how much you can provide, and some better payment what you can think of. providing. So something which is above the minimum level. But if you need to look, you need to look into how all others are being getting paid. So the similar payment, if you are setting, it's a fair wage. Sorry, it's fair wage, and it is being practiced accordingly all throughout the trades, different trades throughout the country. So then that wage rate can be considered as a fair wage. Now, how much you can pay above your minimum wage? Now that depends on various factors. One, basically the minimum wage, because that gives you the base, and above that it's the capacity of the industry to pay. And the other factor what can be considered in understanding the fair wages is the prevailing rates of wages for the similar occupations in the same region or neighboring localities, or you can consider the factors of productivity by the labor, or you can consider the overall national income levels and how it is distributed all over the geography of the country, and what is the place of the industry in the economy. So it is a high contributing industry, or it is a low lying industry. Now, what is the contributory levels of that industry in the economy? So based on that you can think of paying better. So if it's very logically understandable that an industry where which is highly important for the economy, that's one thing, and the national income overall the country is a little bit better. People can access things in a very comfortable way, and even people productivity is a little bit is higher. So it's obvious that under that conditions, industry may have a better capacity to pay, not only for the sustenance, the industry can pay better than what uh, people can get for the work, right? So fair wages can be considered from that part. Uh, at the other end, if we start with the one end with the minimum wages, there is at the other end, we can think of the upper limit, which can be considered as a living wages. Now, living wages are something which are basically at the highest level of wages, and the same committee, Fair Wages Committee of 1948, has defined this concept also as it's the as the highest level of wages that should enable the earner to provide for himself or herself and his or her family, to both together. Not only the bare essentials of food, clothing, and shelter. Not only that, they can also have some level of comfort, which includes your education for children, protection from means you can say medical protection, some social security requirements being fulfilled, no, some measure of sorry, measure of insurance, no, that can be considered against misfortunes, like old age situations. So all these little bit comfortable kind of thing, a kind of idealness what we can see in terms of earning. So I'm earning something which is very ideal for me. So that is the kind of look or viewpoint can be had from this concept called living wages. So living wages may be described as an ideal wage for an employee, because it takes care of all the requirements, not only his or her, but also his or her dependents. So it is something which is very being sought out by the employees. So at the highest level, companies can think of fixing wages at the living wages level. Now, this normally depends on national income and ability of the industry to pay. So, if your national income is very good, your country's national income is very good, people are earning or having per capita income is very high, industries are paying higher salaries, then there are cases where living wages can be very easy to come. Now, this idea of living wages in the Indian context actually comes from our constitution, uh, wherein there is a part called Directive Principles of State Policy, where the constitution gives guidelines to the state, might be the central government or even the state government. So, constitution provides some guidelines how they should run their governments, right? What should be the administrative levels? So from those guidelines, this living wages part can be drawn, which is there in Article 43 of the Constitution of India, which is considered as a part of Directive Principles of State Policy. According to that, uh, what guideline is given to the governments is that the state shall endeavor to secure by suitable legislation or economic organization or in any other way to all workers, agricultural, industrial or otherwise, work a living wage conditions for work, ensuring a decent standard of life and full enjoyment of leisure and social and cultural opportunities. Now, if you are getting only minimum wage, if you are getting only fair wage, you may not see people of your country having a full, what do you say, uh, full exercise of the kind of standard of living that country, the people of that country is supposed to have. So when that is not being there, so there might be chances that you are not operating properly, you are not administering your state properly. So follow this guideline. So it's a guideline for all the governments that they should make sure that people who are working in any of the work areas should get sufficient wage so that they can have a good standard of living. It's all a kind of an ideal thing. So living wages are something which are backed from the governments also, not just from the employees working aspect, productivity or results, performance, not just also from the employer's willingness. So it's also the state government or central government that they have to take care that people in their state or in their country should be getting sufficient money, and that sufficient money is sufficient enough to provide them a good standard of living, right? So from that sense, living wages kind of an ideal notation what can be conceived, right? So this is about the three types of wages. We have gone through minimum wage, uh, fair wage and living wages, right? So this is with regard to the first part of the fifth unit what we had. uh, Next videos we will look into the remaining two parts, right? So till then, bye bye.